Good morning. It's morning here. Having some coffee and going to talk a little bit about my family. Now, I don't talk too much about my family in telling my stories because these are my stories, so I want to make sure they're centered on myself. But to understand why I am the way I am, I had to take a look at how I was raised. So, going to be a few stories about my family. Good morning again. It's the next morning. This is how I get things done. I do a little bit each morning because I have just a little bit of time in the morning before I have to go to work. Anyway, I'm babbling. Hold on. Simon's clawing at the door. Let me see if he'll let me pick him up. Come here. You let me pick him up. That usually doesn't happen. He usually doesn't like it. Sometimes. Yeah. Oh. Snuggly. Oh. Oh, hey, don't get mad. Okay, so back to my family stories. And I don't mean to complain about my family or my parents. It's just important to look at how I was raised and how I came to have the mental habits that I have. You know, my dad was very loud and very critical, so I've always had self-confidence problems. And it's taken a long time to get over that. And the majority of my stories are about my development as an artist. That's my main point of view. And I didn't have a lot of confidence as an artist, so it was hard for me to do my art, to figure out what I was doing, to have confidence in my drawing skills. Took many, many, many years, longer than I would have liked. But I did get there in the end. So I have some props, some photos, and also a written script again, edited a little slightly from my Instagram stories. I also realized I didn't really talk about my mom in my Instagram stories. I think I was kind of anxious to just tell, here's a little bit of my family history and let's get started when I graduated from high school. But I've got a few stories about my mom. As well as my dad. My parents were born in the 1920s. They grew up during the Depression, my mom in Chicago and my dad on a farm in Nebraska. Dad joined the Navy, but World War II ended before he was deployed. My parents married in the 1940s and had 3 girls, 2 years apart. Then a few years later, they had my brother. My mom told me they had a block party when he was born, although one of my sisters told me they actually had a lot of block parties back then, which would have been the late 50s. So then I was born. Mom always told me I was their love child, but I never knew what that meant. Here's what I didn't know until I was in my 30s. I was an accident. Mom and Dad were Catholic, and birth control was never an option, but Mom thought they were done having children, and then I came along. Her birthday is the day after mine. She was 39 when she had me and turned 40 the next day. Happy birthday. My sister number 2 told me Mom had postpartum depression after I was born. She was 13 years old the summer I was born, and she took care of me. They moved her bed into the baby room because mom just couldn't deal with it. In the fall, when school started, she got me up, bathed, dressed, and fed, then handed me off to mom and went to school. Going back to HSP, highly sensitive person, the HSP author says HSP children can pick up on the moods of others even if they don't understand the implications. I always felt like I was the spare kid. Because I was. Sister number 2 asked me, "Did you hear about the morning we lost you?" No. So back then, a king-size bed was 2 mattresses put together. And mom had set me down on the bed, and I slipped down between the 2 mattresses. And then she made the bed right over me, and they didn't know where I was for a little while. So my sister told me when they found me, I was snug as a bug in a rug. So there's a little drawing of me lost in the bed. Me and my mom. I have 4 here. And also in these photos. This looks like a vacation. I had a different dad than my siblings had. They had younger, happier dad, and I had older, angry dad. My sisters tell stories of dad reading to them at bedtime, playing games with them. He took his 3 girls fishing, and the whole family went camping. Just after I was born, Dad made a haunted house in the garage for Halloween, hanging up sheets with music playing and all sorts of props. By the time I was in grade school, he wasn't doing anything like that for me. My dad was the oldest of 3. From the stories I heard, his mother resented life on the farm and poured everything into her oldest son. As an example, Dad told me about an outdoor summer job he had after high school, and his mother cooked 2 chickens for dinner, one for him and one for the rest of the family. When he was in the Navy, some young woman said she was pregnant, and Dad married her. She came to live on the farm, probably hoping to get his naval salary. And sorry for too much information, but his mother saved the woman's used period supplies, and then she took them down to the naval base to prove that the woman was not pregnant, and she got that marriage annulled. Nobody was going to do that to her son, the oldest son anyway. I rarely heard stories about his brother or his sister. For his career, my dad designed the inner components of televisions. He changed jobs so frequently that people always thought we were military because we moved so often. Sometimes the company moved Dad, and sometimes Dad changed jobs. One of my sisters thought the companies kept moving so they wouldn't have to offer employees a union. Another sister told me that Dad refused to work for a woman or for anyone younger than himself. He would quit and move again. So, the dad I grew up with was angry and bitter. One of my sisters said he was always a bear, meaning gruff and loud, but as he got older, the fun dad parts faded away. I think I know why he was so angry and bitter, because he passed up a golden opportunity when he was younger, and I think he regretted it his whole life. My mother died in 1991, and my father remarried soon after. My father died in 2005. At his funeral, his second wife told a story he didn't want told until he died. A story she said he could never tell my mom, although I dispute this. Dad was flown down to Eglin Air Force Base in Florida to help them with stealth technology. It may have been before I was born, it may have been just after. I assume sometime in the early 60s. He looked at what they were doing and suggested some changes, and it worked. They couldn't see the planes on radar. He was then offered a commission in the Air Force, but he turned it down because the rank and salary weren't high enough. I found it suspect that Dad didn't tell Mom anything about the Air Force, especially since he had to be away from home for a while. Maybe he didn't tell Mom about the tech he worked on, but the job offer? Evenings in our house when I was growing up consisted of Dad sitting in his chair talking at Mom while she did embroidery. I can't believe he would never say anything about the job offer. When I was 4, we moved from the Chicago area to El Paso, Texas. My dad started a business, electronics design, maybe, or engineering. I'm not sure, but it failed. Sister number 3 told me years later that mom and dad were deeply embarrassed about this. That was their generation. A lot of things had the potential to deeply embarrass my mom. When I was in kindergarten, which was El Paso, a local TV station had the Romper Room show, and they would bring kids from our school to the station to be on the show. One day it was cold, so Mom dressed me in camping clothes, a sweatshirt and jeans, because she didn't know that was a Romper Room day. She was very embarrassed that I went on TV dressed like that, because had she known, she would have dressed me up. We moved to Laredo, Texas next. I was in grade school at the time. My dad worked across the border in Mexico. There was an Air Force base in Laredo, Texas, and I wonder if Mom looked at those military wives, officers' wives, and thought, that could have been me. So when I was in my 20s, Dad used to lecture me about all of my lost opportunities. I had all these opportunities that I passed up to get married, to have a career, and I was like, what is he talking about? I called it, I got the lost opportunities speech again. I never had any opportunities to turn down. He seemed to think that the world in the 1980s and 1990s was exactly as it was for him in the 1940s and 50s. And it wasn't. I now realize this was all projection. He is the one who turned down a great opportunity. No wonder he was angry, bitter, and resentful. He was raised to expect that the world would be handed to him on a silver platter, and he turned down his best offer. I bet he turned them down thinking they would counteroffer or meet his demands. I bet it shocked the hell out of him when they did not. I finally realized that all his anger directed at me was not my fault, and I realized it very recently due to the HSP work, the highly sensitive person workbook and exercises. I was the only one left at home, being the youngest. He couldn't berate my sisters or my brother. They already left home. I always rolled my eyes when I got the lost opportunities speech, but I am glad I figured out the possible context. These are some photos of my mom when she was younger. She was a typical woman of her generation. She was raised to obey her father and then her husband. I know she didn't like moving every few years, but if her husband decided, she went along with it. I know she would have chosen to stay in Chicago, where her family lived. Mom was very kind, very sweet, and supportive to a point, but she deferred to Dad most of the time. I think she expected that everyone was just so used to Dad's blustering and bellowing and criticism that we should have just ignored it because Dad's the head of the household and those are the rules. She said to me sometime in my 20s, after Dad had berated me for something, "Oh, Lisa, I hope you don't still let what your dad says upset you." Like, really? As an HSP, I don't handle yelling very well, or even just snipping and sniping, and Dad did not give constructive criticism. He just criticized. But even Mom had limits. My dad couldn't stand it if anyone didn't have anything to do. If he was home, we couldn't just sit around and watch TV, so we all learned to get out of the house, or else, by God, he'd find something for us to do. "Go put that bucket on the west side of the house." Huh? That side of the house, Lisa. Once he sent me out to his vast tool bench in the garage to fetch a pair of needle-nosed pliers, and I didn't know which of his 50 pairs of pliers that was, so I just picked one. And it was the wrong one, and he yelled at me, "How do you not know what that is?" And Mom said, "Dear, she's not a little Miss Fix-It." I actually thought that was pretty funny. Despite occasional lack of support, most of the time, my mom tried to spend time with me and ensure that I wasn't too lonely, being the only one left at home. When we moved to Indianapolis, which was my third high school, it was 3 weeks before the school year ended, my junior year of high school, and I did not have enough time to make friends. My mom took me out just about every weekday that summer. We went exploring, going to shopping malls, going out to lunch. She didn't want me to sit at home by myself all summer long. Even after I moved to Atlanta, Mom and I wrote letters, sent cards. She would send me coupons and recipes, and sometimes containers of baked goods. She sent me money to fly home to visit. When I was either a senior in high school or just after that, Mom and Dad went to this thing called Marriage Encounter. It was a retreat for married couples. I think she thought it might help Dad be a better husband or a better dad. Maybe less of an asshole. One exercise they had to do was separate and write out their answer to the questions, why do I want to go on living, and why do I want to go on living with you? And Mom said when they returned from the retreat, Dad was a changed man, very briefly. But after a while, he just reverted back to his old habits, because why should he change? She did say that he was shocked to discover that his family thought there was anything wrong with his behavior. He just assumed his family loved and adored him no matter what. After that, my mom gave up any hope of him changing at all. My mother died in 1991, and I have often wondered what my life would have been like had my dad died first, if we could have had time with Mom without him. Ah, well, I guess we'll never know.